Good evening and welcome to the first installment of our lecture and film series Black Atlantic Cinema in the year 2025. There will be 9 more events in the series. Another one with Greg the Queer, film scholar, curator from Belgrade/Los Angeles on February 13th. Then we have a spring break hiatus, and we will resume work in early May and continue to hold events until July 24th. The full program for the summer season will go online and live on the DFF website very soon. And we will circulate that information. But we're very happy to have you all here tonight, and it is my distinct pleasure to introduce our speaker tonight, Professor Jennifer Blaylock from Rowan College in New Jersey in the United States. My name is Vincent Sediger. I'm a professor of cinema studies at Goethe University, and I'm one of the 3 curators of the series, Black Atlantic Cinema. Daniel Fairfax is another one of the curators. He's here in the room with us today. Didi Chico is back in Lagos temporarily, but he will re-emerge in May and join us for all the events for the summer term. And will spend more time here in Frankfurt with us from the month of May through July 2025 Our speaker tonight is one of the most important, to my mind, one of the most important scholars working on African media and film today from a European and North American perspective. And she's going to introduce us to one of the most important films in the canon of third cinema, but also one of the most important filmmakers among the group of those who you could say belong to the realm of the Black Atlantic cinema. Sarah Maldoror is someone who has connections to the French Caribbean, the Francophone Caribbean. She worked a lot in North Africa and Algeria and West Africa and Angola and Guinea-Bissau. And we're going to learn about this in the next 45 minutes in Jennifer Blaylock's introduction. Professor Blaylock earned her master's degrees. She has 2 of them. One in, and I insist on sharing that information with you because there is a parentage between the work that she's doing and the work that we're doing in terms of training film archivists. One of her master's degrees is from New York University in the film archiving program. What's the official title of the program again? Moving Image Archiving and Preservation, which has been running for over 10 years in parallel and close cooperation with our own film culture program here in Frankfurt, which we're organizing as a cooperation of the DFF and the Goethe Universität. And her other degree in cinema studies is from the University of California at Berkeley, as is her PhD. And Professor Blaylock has taught at the university at Oberlin College, among others, and has been at Rowan for 3 years now. 2 years? My second year. Oh, really? Yeah. Your second year. Okay. Her work covers film, African cinema, and African media and television. A lot of her work and a lot of the work that will go into her forthcoming book /books covers television in West Africa with a particular focus on Ghana. I promise you this is a very, very exciting topic, and we had long conversations today about the parallels between Ghana and Nigeria and the Nigerian television archives and programming histories. So this is a truly groundbreaking work that Professor Blaylock has been conducting, and that has been published in a series of essays that are already available, but it is converging towards a larger book manuscript. And she's been involved in film restoration projects and archiving work concerning African cinema and third cinema in particular for more than a decade. We're very happy that you accepted our invitation and that you will share with us your insights into one of the most significant films about the armed resistance against colonialism in Africa, SAMBIZANGA, and the restoration, preservation, and circulation histories of that film. The floor is all yours. Thank you.
Great, thank you. This is exciting. I wasn't thinking about this film at the beginning of 2025 because I feel like it's a very hopeful film, at least for me, even though it's about colonial oppression. I feel like it gives us tools to figure out how to continue to fight the legacies of colonialism that we face globally. But more specifically, today I'm going to talk about I'm actually going to read from an article that I'm in the process of writing right now that will hopefully be a part of a special issue in Black Camera on SAMBIZANGA. And so, I'm gonna read from this article, and in that way, I'm gonna have spoilers. If you haven't seen the film before, you're gonna know what it's about before you watch it. But I promise you, it'll still be engaging. You will still enjoy seeing how it all unfolds. The other note is that it is argumentative, what I'm presenting here today. That being said, I hope afterwards we can have a conversation where you disagree with me or see things otherwise and share it with me. The nature of this talk is about a comparison between the restoration of the film that came out in 2021 and the original that came out in 1972. And I'm going to give some specific details about a particular print that circulated and how we might read that as part of the meaning making of the film. Okay, that was a long preamble, but thank you for having me. Excited to be here. Let's go. So SAMBIZANGA is a fictional account of the beginning of the armed struggle for Angolan independence from Portugal, set a decade before its release. SAMBIZANGA is unique in that it is an anti-colonial film that was released while Angola was still fighting for independence. Its revolutionary status was reinforced by the participation of active members of the liberation group, the MPLA, one of many liberation groups that were operating in exile from Angola. Mario Pinto de Andrade, the Angolan poet and co-founder of the MPLA, was the co-scriptwriter for the film. Sorry. Oh, we lost it. This part's not that important anyway. So he was the co-writer for the film, along with a French writer, Maurice Pons. And then also the film was made with the help of the MPLA guerrilla fighters who were employed as non-professional actors. So this led to its sort of credibility as part of a revolutionary filmmaking tradition. The film was also, because it had such close ties with the MPLA, it was a form of propaganda for the group itself in setting the film and their group, giving it them international stature during the period of fighting. So the film is often considered a feminist contribution to the films of third cinema. It offers a radically different view of revolutionary filmmaking and activism that is not solely based in armed combat. Okay. The script was adapted from the 1961 novel The True Life of Domingos Xavier by white MPLA nationalist José Luandino Vera, who was born in Portugal but grew up in the African quarters of Luanda in Angola. So like the novel, SAMBIZANGA follows the capture of the anti-colonial activist Domingos Xavier and the efforts of the Angolan nationalists to resist the Portuguese colonial government. However, departing from that novel, the role of Domingos' wife, Maria, is expanded and centered in the film, adding a distinctively feminist perspective on decolonial work. Oh, I went too soon, but that's okay. Sambizanga follows Maria as she searches for Domingos, who is held for his involvement in the resistance. Just before she locates him, Domingos is tortured to death during an interrogation, and this precipitates the start of armed struggle with a prison attack on February 4th, 1961. Not only does... Oh, we're still having problems with this. Sorry. Is there someone that can help me with that? Thank you. Okay, so not only does Sambizanga focus on the period before armed struggle for liberation, before it begins, but the film also emphasizes the importance of women's care work in building solidarity within revolutionary communities. Is it me, like, moving that's causing the problem? The director, Sarah Maldoror, which we've already been a little bit introduced to, is known for being the first Black woman to direct a feature film in Africa. Maldoror was born in the southwest of France in 1929 to Guadeloupean father and French mother, but she has long been considered this honorary figure of African cinema. She was deeply invested in the Angolan revolution and liberation struggle, as well as other African countries, and she was married to the scriptwriter, the co-scriptwriter Mario Pinto de Andrade, and they worked closely on this film together. And even though Maldoror insisted that the goal of Sambizanga was, quote, to make Europeans who hardly know anything about Africa conscious of the foreign war in Angola, Mozambique, and Guinea-Bissau, end quote, she premiered the film at the Arab and African film-focused Carthage Film Festival held in Tunis. It was there that the film won the top festival prize, and Sheila Petty argues that it was Maldoror's position, both inside and outside of the culture that she documents, that lends it to this particular unique edge. Sambizanga's dual address to Western audience, while also being known as the first African feature to be directed by a woman, was perhaps what led to this success of the film in the U.S. context, in the independent film circuit, but also in global context across the Black Atlantic. Sambizanga became nearly impossible to see in the early 2000s. New Yorker Films, which distributed Sambizanga in the US and Canada, was sold in 2002, making it challenging for curators to locate prints to screen and for scholars to analyze the film. However, there was one well-known circulating 16mm print held by the New York Public Library that cinematics and festivals would repeatedly borrow for screenings, and my first encounter with this film was that print at the Pacific Film Archive in Berkeley, California. The curator came out and apologized for the status of the print, the many scratches and sort of discolorations of it. So in 2013, following the rise of Black Lives Matter protests and activism in the United States, in response to the acquittal of George Zimmerman for the death of Trayvon Martin and many Black deaths perpetrated by police officers across the United States before and since, screenings of Sambizanga increased, particularly as in New York, there was this strong film culture that was easily supplied by the NYPL 16mm print. So on... Okay, so go back to the one that has the poster that's for light industry is where we're at, where we need to be at. So past this, there, no, okay, now we're too far back. Okay, next slide. Right here, stop. Okay, so on July 30th, 2013, only 17 days after the Zimmerman acquittal, the microcinema light industry screened NYPL's 16mm print of Sambizanga. Next slide. In 2019, the Film Forum in Manhattan screened this NYPL print as part of a series entitled The Hour of Liberation, Decolonizing Cinema 1966 to 1981. Next slide. But it was the Brooklyn Academy of Music, BAM, under the curatorial vision of Ashley Clark, that Sambizanga became a critical part of Black film programming in the late 2010s. BAM screened the NYPL 16mm print in a series called Black Skin, White Mask, Cinema Inspired by Frantz Fanon in 2017. In 2018, they curated it as part of a series called Say It Loud. Yes, in 2018, they did a series called Say It Loud, Cinema in the Age of Black Power. And again, in a series entitled Rise Up, Portraits of Resistance in 2020. So in 2021, Sambizanga was restored by the Film Foundation's World Cinema Project and the Cineteca di Bologna, and the DCP version of the film that we'll watch is from that restoration. It was restored in 4K using the original camera negatives with the color grading supervised by Anushka de Andrade, Maldoror's and Andrade's daughter, and the cinematographer Jean-Francois Robin. The film was restored as part of the African Film Heritage Project in an initiative co-created by the Film Foundation's World Cinema Project and the Pan-African Federation of Filmmakers and UNESCO. Following the re-release, screenings in international festivals and cinematheques across the world led Sambizanga to find new global audiences in the early 2020s. So next slide. Furthermore, Criterion released Sambizanga on DVD and also made it available on streaming platform Criterion Collection, facilitating access, at least in the United States and Canada, to watch the film at home, as long as you pay for access to their collection, right? So the increased accessibility for festivals and curators that the 2021 release of Sambizanga has brought should be celebrated, particularly as it has played a critical role in contemporary conversations about legacies of colonialism, especially now. Yet I want to challenge the status of the 2021 re-release as a restoration. Footage has been removed. The new release is shorter. It shrunk from 102 minutes to 97 minutes. Shots have been added to the new version. And most of these significant changes occur towards the end of the film during the emotional aftermath of Domingos' murder. In the original, the scene depicting Maria grieving her husband's death is followed by an extended dance scene documenting festivities. In the 2021 re-release, these consecutive scenes are considerably shortened and combined with the dramatic insertion of Maria crying into a scene where people are dancing. So it's re-edited as well as just shortened. Complicating matters, the 2021 version, Sarah Maldoror's final cut, as Anushka describes it, was finished and released after Maldoror's death from COVID in 2020. So in this talk, I will share with you some of the affective qualities of the NYPL print to ask what happens to the revolutionary, grainy aesthetics, the militancy of the imperfect image, the subversive qualities of a damaged 16mm print when a film enters the canon. To do this, I will analyze and compare the differences between the two versions of the film and explore the damage of the NYPL print that circulated as part of Black Lives Matter activism. And think about how this particular print contributed to the revolutionary themes of the film. I argue that the feminist theories of resistance that are dominant in the 1972 version become less prominent in the shift toward narrative cohesion in the 2020 version, and that the scratches of small gauge material history release a revolutionary affect that is different from the aestheticization of revolution emphasized in the conservative act of Sambizanga's 2021 quote-unquote restoration. So Sambizanga has long been celebrated for the attention it gives to Maria, but the film begins with Domingos at work at a construction site, setting up the expectation that Domingos will be the central protagonist. Surprisingly, however, the narrative focus transitions from Domingos when he is captured by the colonial police to concentrate on what happens to his wife, Maria, in his absence. Cross-cutting between the violence perpetrated by the colonial police upon Domingos and shots of Maria and the many women who care for her, console her, feed her, take care of her children, take care of her child in the aftermath of Domingos' capture. Through that, the film visualizes and accentuates women's care work as part of the decolonial struggle. So slide. Sheila Petty notes that Sambizanga's structure parallels Domingos' arrest with that of the journey of his wife, emphasizing a dichotomy between the sexes as a central feature of the film. Petty warns that the Western feminist reading of the film may see the gendered spaces of Maria and Domingos that are physically and ideologically isolated from one another and predicated on this sort of traditional categories of male and female labor. Domingos works at a construction site while Maria stays at home with the children and cooks. That this may seem to reinforce the oppression of African women. But Maldoror sought to address an international audience with her film, and as such constructed characters grounded in the specifics of the Angolan political situation, who are nevertheless universally recognizable and transferable to other revolutionary contexts. So as Maldoror explains, quote, "In this film, I tell the story of a woman, it could be any woman, in any country, who takes off to find her husband." The film sets up the expectation that Domingos will be the hero by beginning the story with him, only to subvert the formula that you might expect of a male hero to go on and follow more closely Maria's search, with only occasional crosscuts back to Domingos. Slide. In her much-cited defense of the film, Sarah Maldoror unequivocally centers Maria as the main protagonist. She wrote, "Some say that they don't see any oppression in the film. If I wanted to film the brutality of the Portuguese, then I'd shoot my films in the bush. What I wanted to show in Sambizanga is the aloneness of a woman and the time it takes to march." So that last phrase, the aloneness of a woman and the time it takes to march, is what most criticism of the film has talked about as sort of the reason of the film, right? Like, this is what we come back to as scholars. So Menthia Diawara interprets Maria's march as the process of, quote, "a woman coming to revolutionary consciousness." And that's also another way that the film has been interpreted. So indeed, Maria begins with no awareness of Domingos's political participation, and it's through this act of walking in search of him that she feels the blunt force of the colonial state. The time it takes Maria to march is also the time it takes for the political consciousness to work on the viewer. That Sambizanga does not simply follow the violence of the colonial oppression as represented in Domingos' story, but also depicts the women who remain and exercise care for one another, is a key revolutionary component of the film that has become more prominent in scholarship more recently in criticism of the film. But it's also, I think, had an influence on contemporary African cinema. If you want to do the slide, particularly one of the films that you will be watching in this series. I think it's showing on June 26th. So Mati Diop's Atlantique also stays with the women who remain, rather than follow the group of male construction workers as they travel to seek employment opportunities in Europe. In striking similarity, both films begin with African men on a construction site. And in each film, the women who stay and mourn are not motionless, but are responsible for sustaining life and precipitating change in their community. If Maria's march leads to greater political consciousness and through her suffering, collective action is possible, the women in Atlantique, through possession across gender, are rendered as sites of transformation, which enables them to seek retribution for their collective exploitation. It is through the women of these African films, Maria's locomotion across geographic space and the women in Atlantique's possession across bodily states, that they mediate change and make collective justice possible. Consciousness is, after all, the movement of becoming. Slide. The change from the novel's title, The True Life of Domingos Xavier, to Sambizanga, the name of a Luanda neighborhood where many Africans lived, was, according to Anushka de Andrade, because Maldoror wanted to focus on the politics of the film rather than a single man. Indeed, the change in the title moves emphasis to a community representative of a movement rather than a single heroic figure. The structure of the film reinforces this ideological emphasis on revolutionary networks and community. Sambizanga is composed of three parallel interwoven narrative threads: Domingos' capture and torture, Maria's search for Domingos and subsequent grief, and the underground communication network that searches for information about Domingos' capture. The screen time devoted to Maria is about 10 minutes longer than the screen time dedicated to Domingos or the Resistance, who have about equal screen time in the 2021 version, making Maria the unequivocal heart of the film. Her story dominates the middle of the film and connects the martyr Domingos through the effective register of singular and profound loss to the revolutionary action of the collective. So as with the narrative switch from Domingos to Maria at the beginning of the film, we'll see that the film at the end unexpectedly leaves Maria to focus on the resistance fighters as a group. In this way, the film does not replace male revolutionary heroes with female ones, but shows how all members of society are necessary to the revolutionary collective. Despite its trifecta structure, film criticism and scholarship has tended to ignore the significance of the sequences focused on resistance members. So Gus Burns downplays the narrative thread focused on the various revolutionaries' attempts to find out information about Domingos' capture, writing that, quote, "These details are more or less inconsequential in the film's narrative, offering a pretense of plot that neither motivates nor animates the images." But I want to insist that Maria's march and the distance traveled by the various characters that will be introduced to, Zito, Chico, Miguel, that they're walking to find out who had been captured, is important for making us feel the time it takes to gain information. Sambizanga teaches audiences how much of revolutionary work is sharing information and gives prominence to the importance of maintaining communication networks. Slide. So, and often in an elaboration of the oft-quoted time it takes to march, Maldoror describes African revolution as a practice of, oh, we're too far ahead. This one, the quote, yeah. Describes African revolution as a practice of waiting. So here's what she says. People who are busy preparing themselves for a fight and all that that entails in Africa, the continent where everything is extreme, the distance is nature, and so on. Liberation fighters are, for example, forced to wait until the elephants have passed them by. Only then can they cross the countryside and transport their arms and ammunition. Here in the West, the resistance used to wait until dark. We wait for the elephants. You have radios, information. We have nothing. If African liberation fighters are left waiting for the elephants that impede the transport of arms and ammunition, this wait also impedes information dispersal. The West has radios, information, media technologies to assist in communication, and African independence fighters have nothing but the time it takes to march. The static interfering with Angolan revolution for Maldoror, then, is not poor reception, but elephants. Nature and distance accent Angolan communication networks as different from those in the West and are felt in the long takes of Maria walking. Petty describes a particularly poignant scene of Maria walking down a deserted street. Quote, "The shot is held for the length of time it takes to physically negotiate the distance. This particular construction of real time reinforces the sense that Maldoror posits Africa's existence in realities of time and history distinct from European or Western constructs," end quote. Like the importance Andre Bazin gives to the long take in Robert Flaherty's depiction of the seal hunt in Nanook of the North, where, quote, "the length of the hunt is the very substance of the image, its true object," end quote. The time that takes to march is the exotic realism of Sambizanga's authenticity. Like a Nanook, experiencing the actual waiting period both authenticates difference and makes transnational empathetic identification with racialized others appear possible. In this sense, the time it takes to march is an experience of racialized African communication networks and a point of identification, a walk in someone else's shoes that leads to consciousness. If human locomotion is the medium carrying information between points, if it is walking in someone else's shoes that radicalizes viewers, Sambizanga reveals that sustenance is the necessary infrastructure of the revolutionary communication network. What is revolutionary, I think, about Maldoror's film about revolution is that it points out that the infrastructures of communication networks are not technologies, but the techniques of food. Critical to Sambizanga's feminist revolutionary ethos is the penultimate scene of the film where members of the nationalist group come together to celebrate life in the wake of colonial violence. The film cuts from Maria's cries of mourning to an open truck transporting musicians to the activist party. This is from the original version and is not in, what I'm talking about now is not in the restoration. So music links these shots, places, and different affective registers together. But nevertheless, the transition from Maria to the musicians is abrupt and disorienting because the camera shifts its relationship to the truck throughout the sequence through a series of jump cuts that don't maintain continuity. All right, slide. The sun lowers in the sky just behind the musician's head, offering the transition between day and night as a metaphor for Domingos' transition from life to death, and the film's movement from sorrow to joy. As the musicians play, children chase after the truck, smiling and waving. With the children's direct address to the camera, the audience is momentarily jolted out of narrative absorption into the documentary qualities that US critics in the 1970s identified as ethnographic. The imperfections of the sequence, its roughness and spatial awareness of the truck and the children, adds to its revolutionary potential. The momentary breakdown of the fourth wall opens the viewer to the politics of the image through unsettlement. The scene following the musicians' transit is a long party scene where women prepare and serve food, musicians play popular Angolan music, and people young and old dance. Arguably, this scene goes on way too long. Slide. Paulin Sumenu Vieira, a notable Senegalese filmmaker and critic, saw the film at its global premiere at the Carthage Film Festival and wrote a review of the film for Présence Africaine that critiqued this party scene in particular as too lengthy. So he wrote, the second weakness of SAMBIZANGA is the length of the ending, where the dance goes on forever without adding anything to the overall meaning. I understand, however, that this ending will be shortened. It should even, in my opinion, be reworked through parallel editing of the three actions: Domingos' torture in the Luanda prison, his death, the party, and the announcement of the attack on the prison for February 4th. So that's more than three things, which is also confusing, but that's his critique. So interestingly, Maria's grieving is left out of his suggested new edit, alighting Maria's sorrow as revolutionary potential. But contrary to Vieira's assessment of the scene as not adding anything to the overall meaning, it is here in the quotidian connections of living that the film reaches its most radical potential. Manthia Diawara disagreed with Vieira's assessment that the dance scene was unnecessary, writing that Vieira, quote, fails to show that Maldoror intentionally used non-professional actors and that the dance scene was supposed to underline the importance of the revolution and prevent identification with the mourners, end quote. So the dance scene importantly pulls viewers away from Domingos' death and Maria's grief to the political action of the collective. The party scene brings each of the anti-colonial resistance members that we have been introduced to throughout the film into the same narrative space. What was presented earlier as individual connections between one person and the next, they become part of a whole network in this scene at the party. Characters like that we see are earlier on are interacting with each other in this new space in a very collective manner. Okay. Slide. There are 10 separate shots of plates of food and one empty plate in this sequence. On the one hand, these shots are repetitive and an inefficient use of narrative time, so one can see how Vieira found it tedious, and perhaps this is why they are all cut from the new version. However, the film's emphasis on food and drink connects the efforts of the Black Panthers to feed children in their communities in the 1970s through the breakfast program, through getting groceries for elders in their community, and the general importance for food sustenance for political movements. In the Black Panther tradition, it removes that sort of aspect that I think this is connected to. Also, I think this scene foresees contemporary U.S. labor activist Chris Smalls, who worked to organize Amazon workers in Staten Island through beer and barbecue get-togethers. SAMBIZANGA, though, through its repeated shots of these plates of food, imparts just how essential food is for political organizing. So the over-presentation of these plates of foods is also precisely when the feminist politics of film become most visible. Slide. So there's this crescendo of food imagery at the party sequence that recalls earlier shots of women preparing, serving, and providing food to the community. Maria and Domingos eat together early in the film. I'm not going to list them all for the sake of time, but like as you watch, this is something to think about. Like, how is this food working as part of the politics of this film? Okay, so, all do you want to read this? So not only are there women throughout the film feeding people in this network of revolutionaries, it's also food that's offered and withheld that the colonial state uses to make its presence known. So it's beer and sandwiches that the colonial police offer and then smash out of Domingos's hand during their interrogation of him. And it's the Angolan nationalist resistance who provide, against their wishes, bread and water and a note of solidarity in the prison. So by making the preparation and provision of food prominent, Sambizanga emphasizes the place of care work and political action and significantly centers food as sustaining Black life in the face of global anti-Blackness. If food provides the means for resistance in Sambizanga, hunger is the mark of oppression in Sarah Maldoror's first film, which is related to Sambizanga, but Monangambe came out in 1969. And like Sambizanga, it's about the Portuguese army's oppression of the Angolan nationalists and was also made with the help of MPLA members. The action of the film revolves around a misinterpretation of a local slang by the colonial police. When a woman visits her Angolan nationalist husband in prison, she promises to bring him a complet. The film begins with a title card explaining that this complet is a national dish of beans, palm oil, fish, and bananas. And the Portuguese think that this complet refers to a suit and that this is somehow related to the prisoner having a plan to escape from prison. So the dish becomes emblematic of Angolan identity in opposition to the oppressive hunger of the colonialist state. The prisoner, in a sort of starvation-induced delirium, converses with a lizard that he sees just outside of his prison cell. And this is what he says. Are you hungry, lizard? Are you hungry too? How do you see me? Like an animal? A great black beast who's hungry like you? They should have given me 2 loaves of bread. 2 loaves. The man who smiled like a rat promised me 2 loaves. 2 loaves to tell all. It is only bread, lizard. What they can't get with whips and torture, they think they can get with hunger, lizard. So in this one-sided conversation shot with a close-up on the prisoner's face, the colonial biopolitics of bare life is foregrounded. The prisoner, through an act of double consciousness, predicts the lizard's perception of him as a beast, and yet he finds animality in the man who smiled like a rat, who promised him bread. So like Glauber Roca's The Aesthetics of Hunger, hunger is the result of colonial oppression. But if Cinema Novo in Brazil, quote, reveals that violence is a normal behavior for the starving, end quote, Sambizanga insists that provisions are also the mean for colonial violence's undoing. So Yasmina Price notes that, quote, in Maldoror's cinematic focus on the unrecorded acts of revolution, providing a comforting dish of food would absolutely be an insurgent action, subverting the brutality of colonial power by insisting on small avenues of care, end quote. Food is the domain of the living and the conviviality of Black life beyond simply surviving. Even when it is announced that Domingos has died, the Angolan nationalists dance. Slide. Like in Steve McQueen's Lovers Rock from the 2020 limited television series Small Axe, which was critically acclaimed for dedicating a whole 10 minutes to West Indian Londoners dancing and singing together in unison, Sambizanga ends with a party sing that goes on for far too long. What Rebecca Wanzo wrote about McQueen's Lovers Rock can equally be said about Sambizanga. Although it, quote, still concerns state oppression, the joyous body sometimes becomes the counterpoint to the suffering one, inviting the audience to feel the threat to the loss of it. To feel the threat to or the loss of it. So while Vieira claims that this dance goes on forever without adding anything to the overall meaning, this momentary halt of narrative progression, the pause for joyful community with others, marks the insistence on Black joy as meaningful resistance. But it is the way that the camera lingers on the details of the party, such as the deep grieving that recalls Christina Sharp's point about the necessary work of living in the wake of continual violence and death. The uninterrupted time the film spends on women's labor in the scene centers the cultivation of space for Black communal joy as an essential part of anti-colonial activism, and the spins and dips on the dance floor, the bodies and movement, are continued in the shots of the tumultuous waves at the end of the film with the announcement of the February 4th planned attack. Okay, time for little break. So slide. So Daniel Talbot who organized the U.S. premiere of Sambizanga in the late November 1973 at the Fifth Avenue Cinema in New York. Talbot founded the New Yorker Films in 1965 as an independent film distributor and later DVD distributor focused on foreign films for the North American market. In the late 1960s and 70s, Talbot notably worked to bring African films to the attention of U.S. audiences. Slide. After first screening Sambizanga, Talbot wrote to Maldoror in November of 1972, expressing how profoundly moved he was by her work and describing the film as a masterpiece in the tradition of great Russian classics. And we can see this sort of like with the cross-cutting, but also she studied filmmaking in the Soviet Union alongside Usman Semben, whose work I think you saw last time. So there's these connections, right? Coincidentally or relatedly, New Yorker Films was also the distribution company for Semben's films in the United States and Canada. So following Sambizanga's premiere, U.S. film critics wrote favorably about the film, often highlighting its simplicity and authenticity. Almost all the reviews comment on Maldoror's experience working on the Battle of Algiers, where she was a production assistant and did a lot of like location scouting. And that remained one of her one thing that she was very interested and dedicated to in her work was location scouting and finding the best place to convey the story. A slide. These same critics praised the film for not being overly focused on race. The Catholic Film newsletter emphasized that the film attacks colonialism and not race. They highlight that the whites are among the revolutionaries and the blacks among the police. Slide. Nora Sayer, writing for the New York Times, also made note of the fact that Sambizanga's Angolan resistance was multiracial. Sayer writes that Sambizanga, quote, offers a class analysis rather than a racial one. The emphasis is on the oppression of the poor by the rich, on the system that perpetuates a minority, end quote. So the racial politics, or this perception of a lack of racial politics that mainstream U.S. news critics in the 1970s read into the film, are important for understanding how African film was received in the 1970s in New York, and how questions of decolonization were separated from questions of race in the United States. So there was this effort to sort of like separate out these very related issues, right? This is unsurprising given the way that Maldoror framed her own work. She once wrote, quote, I have no time for films with political rhetoric. I'm against all forms of nationalism. Besides this, the color of a person's skin is of no interest to me. What is important is that what the person is doing, end quote. So some critics thought that despite its simple humanistic story, its commercial appeal would be restricted to art house bookings. But slide correspondence between Talbot and Maldoror, he explicitly he implies that he thinks that there's not enough interest for the film to be released nationally. And so he basically just says like, we're gonna make this available for the non-theatrical distribution. He writes that they're getting a great number of bookings for the film in universities. And he anticipated that it would have like a long life in the university classroom setting. So indeed, Sambizanga was shown quite regularly in film courses across the US. And while New Yorker Films only had the rights to distribute in the US and Canada, on occasion they actually rented prints globally. A print from them was screened in Berlin in 2001, the Hong Kong Arts Center in 1998, the British Film Institute in 1990. So somehow they were still renting I mean, maybe they weren't charging and that's how they could get around it. However, no, they were, because I saw the records. However, most of the New Yorker Films rentals were, as he predicted, non-theatrical rentals to universities. So slide. In 2002, New Yorker Films was purchased by Madstone Films, and in 2009 was forced to close when they defaulted on the loan. There are no rental records for Sambizanga past 2001, and in 2010, New Yorker Films was acquired by Aladdin Distribution, and they started selling their prints mostly to the Harvard Film Archive between 2011 and 2013. One of their prints of Sambizanga that's in pristine condition was also later sold to University of Chicago, and I looked at that print, and it's the best version of the print that I've seen in its original form. Anyway, okay. And then in 2018, they quietly shut down. And by the 2010s, New Yorker Films was just basically anyone that was interested in seeing the film, they said, go rent the New York Public Library 16mm circulating print. So, to refresh our memory, all those times during Black Lives Matter protests, the print was being borrowed from the NYPL print in the US and circulated. And I want to now switch to thinking about how that print looked. Unfortunately, I don't have a copy of it. They wouldn't let me record it when I looked at it at the library, but I took notes and I'm going to share some of those with you, and I have a few stills that I can point out. Okay, so the 16mm material history of the NYPL print releases a revolutionary aesthetic different than the aesthetic beauty of revolution emphasized in the canonical version of the film released in 2021. Reading closely the film Damage, these thin green lines that appear on the NYPL print of SAMBIZANGA discloses the affective aesthetics of decay and death in the film during a period of reckoning with institutional racism in the United States that was expressed through the death of Black lives. Okay, so slide. The NYPL print begins with intermittent holes over the opening sequence of waves. These holes give way to several black scratches, mostly through the middle of the frame. The horizontal holes in horizontal shape blend into the tumultuous waves. They appear as hand-drawn froth on the crest of a crash. Both Reel 1 and Reel 2 of SAMBIZANGA began with waves, and the end of the film also ends with pictures of waves. So predictably, if you're a projectionist, you know this, that when you have reels of film and you're changing them, those ends of the reels and beginning is where the damage happens because there's more handling of the actual film. And then that's where you'll have any errors where the sprockets aren't lining up correctly. And then you'll get scratches and damage. So the structure of the film being focused around waves at these key moments led to a lot of scratches, kind of like the few that you see or holes here that sort of blend into the waves. Okay. All right. So the fact that this damage ends up often over waves because of the structure of the film links the damage and decay to a symbol of change at the heart of revolution. The wave is water revolving in space. It's repetitive. It keeps coming again and again, but is never exactly the same, and it never settles. There is comfort in the steadiness of its change, that the sign of the death and life of a film, for even as the scratches and holes are signs of image loss, they are also the sign of use, that the film has been seen and therefore lives in the memories of people who've seen it. That this happens in greater propensity over the images of waves in the film draws parallels to this revolutionary impulse in both the composition and decomposition of the film. Importantly, these films on the coast of Angola these waves on the coast of Angola are part of the Atlantic, where Black death and life have long been materialized. That the film teeters between life and death in the wake of the transatlantic slave ship matters. There are other moments when scratches appear in conversation with the film. Film scratches evoke scarification on the elders' faces. Vertical black scratches spaced almost perfectly across the screen or follow the lines of a pier where activists are meeting to fish. Four scratches become strings of an instrument, visualizing the soundtrack as Maria walks down the lonely road. Slide. But the most striking are the green scratches that appear toward the beginning of Reel 3, where Domingos, after being brutally beaten by the Portuguese authorities for not giving the name of the white independence sympathizer, he's being cared for by fellow inmates in the shared cell. Upon Domingos' death, the other prisoners who are also part of the resistance clean Domingos' body and his face while singing to him and to each other. While this is happening in the NYPL print, a deep green scratch appears at spaced intervals throughout the scene on the right-hand side, and it comes in and out like a heartbeat, or perhaps Domingos' last breaths. It is here that the thin green line becomes the space between life and death. But the scratch continues to reappear at a steady pace throughout the reel, even after Domingos has passed, only disappearing once his death is announced to all at the resistance party. Well, the print is still available for viewing at NYPL at the Performing Arts Library at the Lincoln Center. A digital copy that was previously available on YouTube has since been taken down and replaced by the vividly colored Film Foundation restoration on the pay for access Criterion channel or other means that you can get to see it. Like there's still illegal ways, of course. The re-release of Sambizanga has removed these marks of filmic decay and use, but along with the elimination of the scratches that bifurcated the first 20 minutes of the YouTube version, which is a version that we will be watching a clip from after the screening, and the rhythmic bright green scratches that remind viewers of Domingos' death after he's gone from the frame on the NYPL print that circulated. So too is gone the uninterrupted black joy of the 1972 version of the film. In the restoration, the party scene is tightened along Vieira's suggestions, cutting out repetitive shots of cooking and serving food, female community building, and the women to concentrate on the male members of the resistance. In the original, the party scene includes shots of all political members that audiences have been introduced to throughout the film. In the new edit, female characters like Mama Sessa, Bibiana are missing from the scene. The women that do remain are just dancing bodies. Thus, in the restoration, the weeping widow comes in to stand for women's revolutionary labor, alighting the gentle presence of women and the work that they do to sustain the collective that was evident in the original cut. Slide. Additionally, the white construction manager is missing from the party. So this racial solidarity that was so important to mainstream white critics in the 1970s is erased for the representation of an all-black resistance in 2021. Additionally, the pleasures of the extended dance scene are compromised by the new insertion of a crying Maria, who into what was once a standalone scene. So the new edit echoes earlier use of cross-cutting between Maria and Domingos with beautiful symmetry. And to some extent, this reemployment of cross-cutting at the end of the film reinforces the sort of complicated emotions of the wake. In both locations, within grief and joy, these feelings are felt communally with women in the space who provide the infrastructure for being together. But importantly, the demarcation of death and life that the original edit emphasizes allows for reparative repose that's necessary for sustained political action. Domingos' death is announced, but the work of living and fighting for liberation goes on. Rather than diminish Domingos' death, it gives space for the living. The restoration of Sambizanga has marked the film's solid place in the canon of global arts cinemas. It has made the film more widely accessible to audiences like us here. We get to see it in the recent than it has in the recent past. Like there was a time when we could not see it, right? Its feminist approach to decolonization is just as useful for political work now than ever. However, I cannot help but mourn the imperfect image and the subversive qualities of the damaged 16mm print and the power that the living death of 16mm scratches have to pull the viewer into histories of collective viewing. Besides the NYPL print of Sambizanga, a bootleg digital version of Sambizanga was uploaded to YouTube in 2012. This digital copy recorded from a projection of faded to red, heavily scratched print is not the same NYPL print, it's a different one, but it did make Sambizanga more widely available to those who were patient enough to look at it. One blogger even wrote in 2020 that the poor quality and bad subtitling just adds to the film. Slide. Okay, so this same digital copy of the film was streamed and then uploaded at the height of COVID by the All African People's Revolutionary Party on YouTube. And they explicitly marked it as a militant text. They used the film for consciousness raising to connect Pan-African socialists, comrades from Santiago, Texas to Halifax, Nova Scotia. This version is no longer available. The upload of the film had included post-screening conversations and had this digital trace of rich political work that Sambizanga did, despite its poor image. Now Sambizanga has entered the canon, streamed without view counts or comments. The marks of collective viewing, scratches, and pocket damage have been traded for the untouched 4K DCP. The aesthetic beauty of revolution has been canonized for us to enjoy. And now I'm going to be quiet and let's watch. Thank you.
First of all, let me thank you again for this wonderfully nuanced and detailed history of the circulation of the film and its restoration, or, I mean, you hesitated to call it restoration. And it was brilliant to get a chance to see the two versions of the ending in comparison. One question this immediately raises, of course, is who made these choices? Because the restoration happened after Sarah Maldoror's passing, and those choices were made, I'm guessing, by her daughter. Can you tell us more about how all this happened?
No, there's a little bit of secrecy about it, to be honest. But I think with the Vieja review that I included, I think because he sees it right when it debuts in 1972, and he says the wording is like, I understand that it'll be shortened. I assume, but I don't have the proof, that he was in conversation with her at that festival, and that was something that she expressed that she wants. This is all my speculation. And Anushka Maldoror's daughter, she says about this version, the 2021 version, that is the vision of the film that her mother wanted. How much involved she was in the actual selection and final edit, that is a little bit of a unknown, or I haven't gotten full answers about. So, but I believe her that this is a version that her mother wanted, perhaps, like something like this, especially because we have that evidence of discussion about it shortening. Yeah,
but I mean, what the comparison also allows us to think about what is missing from the restored version. What would your take be?
Well,
I may ask you.
Well, I mean, I think that's what I was trying to argue in what I was talking about before. But I mean, even rewatching it right now, like juxtaposed, like the role of just the food and the dancing. There's just more space with having not the cross-cutting between these two scenes to just like be and live and thrive, even though you know that this death just happened. I don't know that there's more breath there to like break from the grieving, even though it interrupts the party, and the film gives space for that grieving at the party. I don't know. It doesn't have to interrupt the flow. And I think that we lose so many of the women that we've been introduced to in the new edit, where it's really just like all the male characters that we've seen.
Yeah, it's sort of the women's grieving is sort of cut back and intersected with the party, whereas in the unrestored version, you sort of have a sequence or a flow starting with the morning scene, the male mourning in the prison, which is also very significant because they also have their chant, and then there's the last time that we hear the signature song, the melody that marks her voyage. I mean, there's this incredible shot in the film, early in the film, where she takes, where she goes on her march, and you have the street, and she appears in the right corner of the frame, and that's the first time we hear the music. And then it's repeated several times, and as she exits the prison, it's the last time that we hear it. And that's a music that has no diegetic source. It's the only music, as far as I know, that doesn't have a diegetic source. So that's sort of her motive. It's almost a leitmotif. Yeah. But the sequence in the unrestored version, you know, is in a way more elegiac and organic, I'm tempted to say. You know, you have the male mourning, then you have the song, then there's a fairly comprehensive scene of the women mourning, and then there's the party. But inserted into that, you still have this moment of the men mourning as they received the message of Domingos Xavier's passing, which is sort of a break in the party, but then the party mood resumes. This is not necessarily to defend the original version, but it has something going for it, I would certainly say. One of the things that I think was really striking in your presentation is that you reminded us about how precarious the visibility of this film, these films are. I mean, this is not the first film that we've shown here that has a history like that, but it's probably the first presentation that we've had that went into such great and useful detail to remind us how layered the circulation and presentation history of these films are. We started out with Adeusa Negra by Ola Balogun, which is a film by a director whose almost entirety of work has been destroyed by fire, and there's only one print which survives in the Cinémathèque Française of that film. And for whatever reason, we're not going to discuss it here in public, but we didn't get the print and then had to screen an okay, but not great digital version of the film. And so we're talking about a whole body of cinema that is obviously extremely important, but, you know, was always in the danger or in the danger of getting lost. And so I think it's great that you reminded us of that distribution history. Maybe you could come back to to your key point about, I mean, as I understood it, you read the traces of the old New York Library print as sort of inscriptions of the viewing history of the film. Can you pick up on that?
Yeah, I can try to. You know, it's funny because, like you mentioned, I have a master's degree in movie and image archiving and preservation. And so in that field, it's like, yeah, you want to preserve things, you want to make them accessible. And, you know, I think looking at the two versions that we had tonight, like you can see how bad that the digital copy at the end was. Like, yes, it can show us what was deleted, but it looks awful. Like, we cannot see the colors. We can't tell what's going on a lot of the time. And so in some ways, my argument today is about like that bad image, which goes against my training to some extent, that we're like losing all this information and this bad quality of a copy of a copy. And I should clarify that the version that we saw was what I believe is a copy of the film that was uploaded to YouTube in 2012. I actually got the copy of this file from the librarian at Oberlin College, and I didn't ask where he got it for me, but you know, I did the proper diligence. But it looks a lot like the one that was on YouTube.
Film marketing like in the olden times. Yeah. You know, can't tell you where the print is from.
Yeah. So that's not what the NYPL print looks like, and I think you can see from the photos that I included in the presentation that the color on the NYPL print is a lot better. Okay, where was I going with this? Remind me of your question.
You were at a point where you're saying against your training and probably also your convictions, you're defending the value of the degraded material.
Yes. So at the same time, there's this question in preservation about like what is lost when we go to digital versus, you know, the materiality of a print of celluloid film. And with the NYPL print, not only is the content different, the actual editing and structure of the film, but also there's something about the way that the loss of images in a print like that that's been damaged show us that it's been watched, that we can see that it has been handled, that it's been shown, and in a sense there's some value or added feeling of watching that, you know, the DCP version that we saw, it's not going to get that damage from watching it tonight. It just won't be there, right? There might be digital artifacting that can happen, but you're not going to get that version of it to show at a place like this, right? So in a sense, I guess that the death of the celluloid print that we see in the scratches reminds us of this way in which I think in this film, there's this connection between Black life and joy and living, but also in this precarious moment where the film is about Black death. So this like connection between these two in a way comes through in the damage of the 16 millimeter NYPL print. And I think, you know, watching it, and again, like my experience with it, I did see that version in 2017 at Berkeley in a room full of people. And that was an incredible experience. But when I wrote about this, I went and looked at it in a small little room at the Performing Arts Library by myself. And it's a very different experience. So I'd also say that, like, even when I think there's value in thinking about scratches as like part of the actual experience and history of the film, there's also that question of like the actual room where you watch it changes things too. Does that answer the question?
Yeah. Before we go to questions from the audience, I'm going to rehearse this a little bit more. I mean, as you know, in restoration theory, there's the big debate in the 19th century between Viollet-le-Duc and John Ruskin, where Le-Duc wants to, like, Le-Duc basically rebuilt all the Gothic French cathedral according to basically a fantasy plan. You know, Notre Dame is his idea of what that church must have looked like 600 years ago. But it's really, you know, it uses armored concrete and all kinds of things. So what we're seeing now in Paris is a reconstruction of a 19th century fantasy of what that church must have looked like in its original stage. And Ruskin opposes, of course, to that a sort of a romantic notion where he says we should leave the ruins as they are. We should just preserve the ruins. And your argument could be construed as a Ruskinite reading, but there's a different layer to it because you very explicitly connected it to Black Lives Matter and to the fact that this is a film about Black death and that the traces speak about that too. So that's a very different argument.
No, but I think that's good to pull out. And I think maybe if I could like position it, I think both of these things can exist, right? Both of these versions of the film. And yeah, anytime there's restoration work, something's going to be different, especially if you're migrating to a different format, right? And so I think we can maybe, as I hinted, mourn the loss of moving from one medium to another and those changes, and try to preserve the ruins. We can also allow there to be something new and different. And, you know, I think the question of like removing the white engineer character in that sequence is really interesting for that and how that means now versus in 1970 when these critics were like, oh, this helps it be like a multiracial project, where now I don't think that's what we needed. People might disagree with me with that, but like I think there's a reason he's edited out, and I think that has a power to it. So I think that's okay to exist as well. And then there's always, you know, artists never, I mean, maybe some do, but most always want to change things. And that's part of, you know, why we have all these different cuts of things. So let's just have them all. And then we could talk about all the differences.
Yeah. It's something that never ceases to amaze me, that the possibilities afforded by digital supports like the Blu-ray are not taken advantage of more systematically. You know, you can have entire restoration histories and multiple versions on a Blu-ray or a DVD. It's just not done for whatever reason. But and then, you know, Criterion will tend to have the definitive restoration, which is nice, you know, and these films have a new life, and it's great that this film now can go out in the world and find new audiences. The first time I saw the restoration actually was at a third cinema conference in Cairo, where it was screened at the Cinematheque, and it had a huge impact on the audience. So it's great that it's out there. But you could, you know, document that history, and you could offer to the audience the possibility of comparing these things. It's just not done, sadly. Yeah.
And I do think, like, the fact that you can't watch it for free, like, I don't know, like the fact that we've lost that that record of actual political organizing on YouTube through the film, like that breaks my heart a little bit in terms of accessibility.
Right. Okay, do we have questions from the audience? Danny? Yeah, please.
Yeah, a couple of things. First of all, yeah, I absolutely agree. We need to be like archiving all these YouTube comments that people put up and then get taken down, because it is actually a rare opportunity to record these kind of discussions. Like, we don't have, for the most part, transcripts of like militant circles of film screenings in like 1971, but like we do have these weird YouTube discussions that these left-wing groups are putting up. But I mean, for me, I mean, I agree that the colors on what you showed us looked awful in the second version, but to me, the colors look too good in the restored. I mean, it's not. It's like a 2020 like dream of what a film could have looked like if it was shot on like some high-end digital camera or something. I mean, I think it's extremely like discordant. For me, I mean, we have no idea. We can't go back in time to 1972 and watch the film then, but somehow like the colors just seem off to me. And it's kind of this like there's this kind of problem with this kind of doing luxury restorations of films that are made actually under much more like trying circumstances and with meager resources. And they are films that are kind of, you know, meant to be kind of battered around a bit, maybe. I mean, that's kind of what the filmmakers saw. But I just another question that I wanted to put to you, which is, okay, the white character who's like the good white guy being deleted from the new version of the film. I mean, was his original inclusion? Is there any way we could know that's kind of a concession made by Maldoror at the time to like placate European audiences who would otherwise be alienated? Like, is that? Do we have any records of that, or why she would choose? Because I also wonder. The restoration was completed in 2021, which was a year after she died, but I assume it was a multi-year process. So she probably did have some input prior to her death. But then also I think there's an interesting contrast between that and then, I mean, the fact that the film very prominently shows Black Angolans collaborating with the colonial regime as the kind of minions. And it doesn't shy away from that. I mean, it's not Manichaean on that level at all. But I found very fascinating that moment in the film where the black prison guard is kind of seeing the white colonial officer like beat up his fellow Angolan, and like there is a moment where you see he's kind of like the consciousness like taking hold in his mind, which I found very fascinating. I mean, it's very brief and subtle and not spelt out, but you can kind of see it on the screen. Which I found a very interesting counterpart to that scene then with the kind of the good white guy at the party. Anyway.
So a couple of things. First, the film was criticized in the 70s for being too beautiful. So I think that reaction to the color, I mean, I don't know if it was the color, but I think, you know, it is aesthetically beautiful. It's well shot. It's well composed. And so it was in that camp of not being political and not being rugged enough, even though we get lots of handheld camera work, right? But I don't know if that's that far off from some of the viewing in the 70s. The white guy and concession, I tried to hint at based on what she has said about the film. She hasn't, nothing that I found talk specifically about him, but that she was trying to reach a global audience, was trying to speak to the West. I think we can imagine how the racial politics there were being worked out, right? I don't want to say that she was making a concession because I can't prove that, but I think there's evidence to think that, or at least in a reading of it, to think about it as a film that has a dual address, an address to white European American audiences and Black liberation organizations on the continent and abroad. So maybe, yeah.
Why shouldn't poor people be entitled to beautiful pictures? And the I mean, we would have to look at the restoration protocols, but basically this is digital color restoration. And so you have an input of information of what we know about the kind of film material that they used and what it would have looked like. And then what's left of the color on the print that you're working with. And I would guess that the film originally looked like this, and that the color scheme is accurate. And you can tell that she, the yellow and lilac contrast, which marks her as the most important figure in every single shot that she's in, because no one else has these contrast colors to mark her out. It makes the film readable for audiences, but it also looks beautiful. And why not have beautiful pictures for poor people? The other thing, I mean, we would have to go back and look into the specifics of the Angolan struggle for independence, but there are very few places in Africa where people who would normally be part of the colonizing cohort switched sides and actually supported the struggle for independence. It happened in significant numbers in Algeria, as we know. It happened, obviously, in significant numbers in South Africa. But there was a contingent in Angola as well. You did have people actually supporting the struggle for independence. So you might say that character could be in there as a matter of historical accuracy. And a good reason to take him out now is that there would be an impression, it would create an imbalance and actually sort of overstate the contribution of white Angolans, because there's also a significant number of people who stayed behind and became Angolan citizens after independence. Whereas in most other, African colonies, the white occupiers just left. So that's a very delicate thing, a delicate choice. But I wouldn't necessarily read it as a gesture towards white audiences. I think it's more about historical accuracy and about saying, there were certain support networks. Which is specific to this particular situation. Similar in Mozambique, by the way. Someone like Rui Guerra is a white guy who was born in Mozambique, went to Brazil, came back at the behest and the invitation of Samora Machel to build up the film industry that Godard had been so terrible at trying to build. So there's that. It's more of like a Rui Guerra figure, I would guess. Yeah. More questions or comments?
I would love to hear from other people, not even questions, but like readings or things that stood out.
Thank you for giving us the opportunity to look at the movie like this, because I actually just got to know SAMBIZANGA because I watched Tukibuki, and then I checked this Scorsese program. I think it was restored or restorated by the same.
No, it's the same program. And Abubakar Sanogo, our colleague from Ottawa, who hopefully will join us for the summer term, is also one of the driving forces of that program. Yeah.
And it's very interesting to have the direct combination of the moving image right afterwards. And I found the end was like, in comparison also, so like I agree in this term that the end was like in the restored version really I felt it was quite or what's the right term, maybe I found it quite stuck in a way, or it was not so like, I think the like time as materiality was much more present in the other section, and it like just like the camera was more observing in the restored version, whereas in the old original moving image, I think, or the original cut, I think it's more a feeling of participation. And also in one of your slides, I saw this. I saw Kidlat Tahimik. And he did this, I saw this Perfumed Nightmare movie, and it reminded me a lot that there were these quite long scenes of, like, I don't know how many people are familiar with the movie, but also what you said, like this, that there was long passages and so on, that gave me the impression where I can think differently by myself. And I think the restored version, especially the end, I think it's especially there quite strong, that somehow very it's a bit quick and condensed, and then it all of a sudden stops.
Maybe that's the influence of Martin Scorsese. He always, wants to point your gaze in a certain way.
I just thank you for that. I love this comparison between observation versus participation. And I like thinking back through it, I can sense that of like the camera being close. Like, is it even closer? Are there more close-ups? I'd want to rewatch it, and how there's close-ups of the different characters. In a way that, it just feels like you're in it. Or, I mean, she uses a lot of like swish pans, which is kind of interesting. And I think there's some like of the food, like here's it, and then here's it. And I wonder if that adds to that like participatory feeling. Thank you.
Please.
Thank you for bringing both versions. I just want to jump on or piggyback on the last comment and say, for me, the 60mm version worked in terms of getting a feeling how the information travels. I mean, you mentioned it with the elephants that cross the road and then you have to wait. And so the other, like the new version, was more instantaneous, where you have things happening in short succession. But I like the chronological order of events, first in the prison, then outside of the prison, and then at the party. It's kind of how the information also itself traveled, and it takes time to reach the party, and it's not jumping. So just to echo what was already.
Thank you for that too, because what's interesting is we cut out that like truck scene, so it's not walking and it's not the time that it takes to march, but we still get a transition moment of like moving from one place to another. And again, like I think it allows us like emotionally to move from one thing to another in an interesting way. So there's that time, even if it's not to march in that scene, that time to pace with the way transportation or the way the actual duration, right? Distances, Yeah,
I mean, the information travels at the speed of the old man. That's a very significant character. By the way, just before we go to Marion's question, the brief discussion about YouTube comments and the archiving of YouTube comments and speculation about what people were saying at historical screenings, all of these films were shown in the forum at the Berlinale, including this one, and Kilatahimi as well, for instance. And there are sound recordings of every single debate at the Delphi Theater after the screenings of these films since 1970. We've been thinking about ways to make them all accessible on a platform, but there is a record. Only it's German intellectuals reacting to the film. But it could still be interesting, It's certainly a historical document of how a politically conscious rather intellectual audience would have watched this film when it first came out. Marion, please. Wait,
can I jump in first, just related to that? So something I didn't talk about was the Black reception of the film in the United States. And there's in the just newspaper reportage of a festival dedicated to Black film that was like, I want to say like 74. I'm trying to remember it off the top of my head, in Philadelphia. And it mentions that the film screened in the article, and then it talks about how everyone went to people's apartments afterwards to talk about all the films that had been shown that day. So I'm just like, I wish I could know what these conversations, but it was like, it expressed in the article that there was debate and like, you know that this is doing political work in that moment, and we just have this trace of it. So anyway, thank you. Sorry for,
I was just coming back to your comment, Vincent. You said the information is traveling at the speed of the old man, but not only, also at the speed of the child in the film. And we have always this child accompanying the mother, Maria, but also at the end, it was for me very interesting to see at the party not only women were cut out from the restoration, but also the children at the party. So it was an international, intergenerational project, and it was very clear in the scene where they are all mourning together the loss of their comrade, and it was interesting to see the different close-up on the faces also of the children trying to understand what it means for them as well.
Thank you. Yeah, I noticed that. I was thinking about that as well, and yeah, and again, like, what's interesting about the old man's character also is the way that the disabled are active participants in revolutionary work. And I think that it, 1972, like this, everyone is involved, everyone, don't leave anyone out. Like, we all have the potential to be resources for not only consciousness, but like active work, right? We all can do it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean the contrast between the old man and Domingos Xavier is also significant. I mean, he's just an incredible, hulk of a man. Certainly the strongest and tallest and biggest guy in all of Angola, you would say. And then you have the old guy contributing his share, and that I think, and that makes the point that you're making, I think, even more relevant, because the part of the meaning of the ending really was to say this is everyone's project. Yeah. Sorry. No. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much. I just wanted to touch on, first of all, the film reminds me of The Man Died. Yeah, thank you. You know The Man Died. Okay, it's just been made into a film recently. Beyond the camaraderie story of the Angolan revolution and all of that, I'm really touched by from the angle of humanity and the work that this woman had to do. I mean, just to probably, help her husband or get her husband back. I mean, it touches more, for me, it touches more on family, the values of, how women really want to look after their husbands. I mean, she wasn't, beyond the political part of this, it was just a very emotional part of it, which also brings me back to The Man Died and the role that women, or the lady that in the story of The Man Died too, that Wole Soyinka was dating, and how she was trying to help in the struggle too. So just the part, the role that women has played in a lot of political struggles that we really never talk about, or that never gets to the pages of the newspapers. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Oh, did you want to respond? No.
Go ahead.
You go.
Okay. There's a literature about the film, of course, and one of the criticisms that you can find in critical studies is that authors criticize Sarah Maldoror for showing the woman as an apolitical figure, because she's not part of the organization, and she doesn't have the ideological training, and she doesn't circulate any messages, but in a way, the trajectory that she's making is one of becoming conscious, of becoming political. And so there's this criticism. It says, yeah, women did have an important role in the independence movements, but this is not the film to tell us about it, because it's showing us the woman as an apolitical figure. And you could debate whether that's a valid criticism or not. But it's certainly true. I mean, in you know, colonial history, contemporary research on colonial history, it's increasingly becoming, you're getting books about the role of women in resistance movements, particularly in Francophone Africa now. But if you look at the case of Nigeria, you know, there's a real substantial history of female resistance and female organizing. And Fela Kuti's mother is just the most prominent example, but there's also the tax strike of 1927, and there's a whole lot of resistance organizing just by women around women's issues that contributed significantly in the case of Nigeria to bring down colonial rule and to making it impossible to sustain. And so in that sense, I would say the film has a really important message to make, and in a way you could also say, I mean, this is something that you also talked about. It's that woman's journey into the movement in a way.
Yeah, and I really liked what you said about like the humanism of it, that it's a human story. And I think, you know, again, that was some of the criticism that I tried to bring up of, you know, like this, you know, male-female dichotomy here and these traditional gender roles that could feel like old-fashioned in a way or oppressive. But I think that what works so good about the film is that it's trying to present this human story, that we can see these characters and see ourselves in them across cultural, geographic differences, class differences, you know, like that there's something there that we can all relate to. And that's the power of Maria's story, to pull us in, to be, you know, wherever we start in our political journey, we can walk with her towards greater understanding of our political situation, right? And so that humanity, I think that's what is critical to Maldoror, like the humanity of it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, one of my favorite characters is the guy who gets slapped in the face by the young woman, and you know, the skirt chaser, who is actually a really important part of the organization. And so what I like about this is that that's the humane aspect again. You know, you can be a flawed person.
Yeah, but the storyline is once you find Marxism, you no longer are a philanderer. You no longer, you stick to one woman. So I don't know.
I'm not sure.
That's the plot. He's like, oh no, I'm better now.
That's what he says.
Yeah.
And then he gets slapped in the face because she knows that he's lying. But in any case, I mean, you know, a lesser artist, and particularly someone infused with the spirit of social realism, wouldn't work with that character or would make a moral tale out of it. This guy stays flawed. There's no redemptive arc in the story, and that's what's great about it. You know, that's who he is. But he contributes a share. He just needs to learn how to treat women well. Probably never will. Yeah. Do we have more questions? If not, we can call it a day. Thank you so much. This has been extremely inspiring and really a great way of engaging with this particular film, but also I think a model of how we should think about the circulation of these films more generally. And thank you for bringing this to us.
Thank you all for staying so long. I appreciate your time.
Yeah.